To help us accomplish our virtual network needs for all of our VMs, the Hyper-V Network Virtualization, HNV, provides us with a virtual switch manager. And this will allow us to create virtual switches. And these are software-based layer 2 virtual switches that can be independently IP addressed for our networking needs. Now, before we go in there, let me take you out to one of our virtual machines that we created earlier. I'm going to go into Settings and take a look at the network adapter. This was something that I selected during the creation of the virtual machine. It was the default one, and you'll see where this default virtual switch came from here shortly. And this gave us networking access. Well, I want to be able to control this, customize this, and create my own networking infrastructure. We can always go back to a virtual machine and change these options. So I'm going to hit cancel, and let's go out and create our first virtual switch. You're going to first see the default one listed on the left, the virtual switches. Now, usually you would want to rename this so that it makes sense. It's picking up the network connection for it and virtual switch. I might rename this for public network number 1 or production network or development network. Right now, I'm just going to leave it as is so we can kind of see what's going on. If I want to create a new virtual switch, we have 3 different options: external, internal, and private. And we're going to do each one of these. Now, we'll start with external. And what this is going to do, when I say create the virtual switch, I can first establish a name for it. And I'm going to call this Network 2. And take a look. I can add some additional notes to explain what the network is for. And then what connection type do you want? So for external, we want to use an external network interface card. Now, this NIC is installed on the Hyper-V host, and this is the default, the first NIC that I had. And you can see that this is where it got that original first virtual switch. Now, I happen to have a second NIC in this Hyper-V host, so I'm going to hit the drop down and I'm going to grab that NIC. And we have a couple of options here. We can allow the operating system to share this network, which is what we want to do, but I want you to take a look at this one. Enable single root IO virtualization. What this does is it works on physically installed NICs in the Hyper-V host when you're doing an external network. It allows the performance features of that physical NIC to be utilized. You know, a lot of network interface cards, they have caching features, additional processing features. Well, if I enable this, then the VMs can use those features and gain better performance. Now, you have to turn this on when you create this virtual network. And, you know, since internal and private, when we get to those aren't attached directly to a real NIC, that feature will not be available. Now, if you have VLANs configured on your physical switches, you can enable VLAN identification and put in the identification number. This is often used for network traffic isolation. In my case, I don't, so I'm not going to enable that. Now, I've got this set up. I'll hit apply and say pending changes may disrupt the network. And we'll say OK. Now I created a new virtual network for a virtual switch that gives me a network that I can change this virtual machine to utilize. I can go down here to network adapter, and then you'll see there's network 2. Now this virtual machine will use that virtual switch and that network. But here's what you want to be cautious of. This always relates back to your IP addressing scheme. So let me show you where this comes from. In other words, what IP address do I assign to this server now? What's his networking side of his IP address? I'm going to open up Control Panel and go into the network settings of my host so that you can see how that additional NIC got configured. So let's go out to the network sharing and we'll go to change the adapter settings. And here's what I want you to notice. Here are the 2 physical adapters when they were installed into the Hyper-V host. Here are the virtualized adapters now that Hyper-V has them, and this happened when that virtual switch was created. Now, this is where the IP addressing assignment is done. So I'm going to go into the first one and show you that the network 192.168.0 is its network. I'll hit cancel. And here's the new one. And when I had installed the NIC and I gave it an IP address assignment, so it picked up that same assignment. 192.168.3 is the network. And if you think about this, these are 2 physical NICs in my Hyper-V host. They're plugged into two different networks with two different network IP addressing schemes. Now, if I wanted to, and I wanted these networks to be able to communicate with each other, the VMs on these networks to talk to each other, I could have a physical router, or I could have the Hyper-V host through routing and remote access do the routing for me. But knowing now what the network ID is, I can now know what my IP address assignments for the virtual machines are going to be. And I can put multiple virtual machines now on that virtual switch. So let's go back to the virtual switch. I'm going to go back into the Hyper-V virtual switch and take a look at network 2 again. And I just wanted to point out, now that it's been created, see the enable single IO virtualization, it's enabled and you can't change it. You would have to delete this and recreate it if you wanted to. The allow management operating system to share this, we're going to talk more about this. So we've got an external one created. This means that all of the virtual machines that I put on network 2 will have access to that particular network adapter. That might be what you want, but maybe that isn't exactly what you want. Maybe you want to isolate network traffic and you want to create a network of VMs virtually on your Hyper-V host. So we have some other options. You'll notice I have two other options here, internal and private. Well, let's take a look at what these differences are. You'll notice that what I just showed you, the external, I had two different network interface cards configured for two different networks. That's one possibility. You could also have the network interface cards configured for the same network with different IP addresses and allowing you to be able to isolate virtual machine traffic. Now think about this for a second. I could have the Hyper-V host on one network interface card, a group of VMs on another network interface card, and so that I don't overload that physical resource, I could have another set of VMs on a different physical network card, and they have access to be able to communicate out to my physical network as well. Well, an internal network is just that. It's where the VMs can communicate on an internally created network, doesn't need a physical network card, and the host can still talk to them. So the Hyper-V host can talk to them. Now, you can still set up routing and get these out to an external by putting into one of your virtual machines an external and an internal switch. And this way you could set up a routing scenario. But what internal is used for quite often is for, well, lab environments. I use that all the time to create multiple virtual machines on a lab environment that's isolated from talking on the physical network. And I can create that virtual switch, and we'll call this internal number 1. And notice it's marked down here. I'm not connecting it to a physical adapter. It's now an internal virtual switch. And I can say, okay, let me click on new virtual network switch. Now the VMs that I assign to that virtual switch will communicate with each other isolated from other virtual switches. I could assign whatever IP addressing scheme I wanted to that internal switch and have those VMs use that. Again, keep in mind, you can have an internal route to an external. You can have one of your VMs do that routing if you need those machines to be able to communicate on your network as well. Now, the other option that we have is to create a private network. A private network doesn't allow any communication between the Hyper-V host and the network that you're creating here. Now that's great as isolation, even further if further isolation in a lab environment that you want to make sure never talks to the Hyper-V host. Anything that you wanted to test or do on a private network where it had no chance of talking to the Hyper-V host, you can do with private. And when you create it, there's the private option, and we'll call this a private one. And say okay. Again, when I have these virtual switches, I can go into the VMs that I want to be located on those and change their networking. Now that's the basics of setting your switching environment up, your virtual switches, for your communication needs. You can always go in and alter these. You can remove these. Now, when you remove a virtual switch, if it's assigned to a VM, if you try to start that VM, you're going to get an error message and you're going to have to go in to the settings and put it on a new virtual switch. And so when I remove this, I'll say apply. Okay. And so it's easy enough to remove them as well. But there's more things that we want to talk about, such as network performance.